So this is the system that connects to the upstairs unit
Yeah.
right here?
So we actually have a couple different outdoor units for my house, and the reason why we do it this way is because for better load balancing. You can imagine that a second floor is going to be very different in temperature than the first floor, and so what we have is we have two different outdoor units that are addressing each of the different floors, rather than one outdoor unit expecting it to address the entire house. This is really the correct way, most efficient way of going about it. And also, if the second floor demand isn't very high, like right now, the I just have one of the two units on upstairs. You can see the outdoor unit is actually just kind of staying dormant, not doing anything right now, which is going to be overall more efficient than if one outdoor unit was doing all the heavy lifting. So this outdoor unit is addressing the two that are on my second floor. We have two 9,000 BTU indoor units upstairs. And so this is an 18,000 BTU outdoor unit. Again, that's addressing the second floor. And you can see the line set going from the outdoor unit all the way up to the second floor. Now, the other outdoor unit on the opposite side of the house, we have the line set going to out over to the front of the house, going through my unfinished basement. And so you can see that it's bracketed onto the foundation right here. These outdoor units, just like the indoor units, are also very, very quiet. They're only up to about 50 or so decibels. And that is because there's actually some sound dampening bolts that we install in here, these washers, so that we can decrease the vibration from these units. Actually, my master bedroom is right here. My bed where we sleep in every night is right there, and we don't notice it at all. It's actually very, very quiet.
And this is it running right now, and it's super quiet.
Yep, it's actually going right now, and again, you could barely hear it.
So it's not like those old air conditionings that you just hear those things nonstop and
Constantly.
you have
No.
to put the volume up. This is incredibly quiet.
Yep. And so this is the second floor, and then we also have the first floor unit over here. So this unit is addressing my the first floor. We've got this going to the master bedroom unit, and then we also have this going to the living room unit that we looked at before. And that refrigerant line set's actually going into my basement, and then from there it's going to the front of the house. And then in this particular case, it's just going to my unit that's in my master bedroom. And so this is just the first floor. We have the electrical disconnect right here, and we have the refrigerant lines coming off of the system. And it's important to understand the direction that the refrigerant is actually going in is different depending on the mode that you're setting in for the unit outside. So it's important to understand things like thermodynamics, really. And it's important to know that heat always is going to want to go where it's not as hot. And so we take full advantage of that with these heat pump systems. And even on a day like today, where it's on the colder side, these units are actually extracting ambient heat from the temperature that's around us and pumping that heat inside. And that's why it's called a heat pump. And so what's going on right now is that the refrigerant that's going through the coils in this outdoor unit is actually getting very, very cold. And we do that by running it through a compression and expansion cycle for the different components that's in here. So this outdoor unit, which is running right now, the coils that are in here are actually getting very, very cold. And when that happens, it's actually extracting heat from the temperature that's outside. Because again, hot wants to go where it's not as hot. So when this is very cold, even though it's very cold outside, this is colder than the ambient air temperature. So it's able to extract a lot of that heat, run that through the refrigerant that's inside, and getting the coils on the inside mini split very, very hot. And then you just have simply a blower motor that blows the air across those coils on the inside and makes that um, conditioned room a lot warmer than it really is. Now, the difference between this and a typical air conditioner, it actually has a reverse valve that can control the direction that the refrigerant is going in. So in the summertime, when we're actually wanting it to be cold inside, the refrigerant's actually going in the opposite direction in this outdoor unit. So what happens is that the refrigerant is actually now um, Also, it's getting very warm here, and so what happens is that going through its expansion cycle on the inside, the evaporator coils on the inside units are actually getting very cold, and it's taking the heat from that's inside of the house. And as it goes through the cold coils, it's actually extracting that heat through the refrigerant lines and dumping that heat outside. And so it's not so much that it's generating heat, it's really just moving heat around depending on the mode that we set it in and the time of the year. So in the summertime, the inside coil is getting very cold. And in the wintertime, the outside coil is getting very cold, and it goes through a compression and expansion cycle. If you have a refrigerant and you compress it and you're upping the pressure of that refrigerant, naturally it's going to get very hot. And so, where air conditioners, the refrigerants are just going in one direction and the inside coil is getting very cold, heat pumps have a reverse valve that can do the exact opposite in the wintertime and be able to pump the air inside of the house. So that's really all we're doing is we're taking advantage of thermodynamics and either pumping air, hot air from the inside of the house outside in the summertime or pumping the ambient air that's outside inside the house during the wintertime. So we're going to talk about how the solar system is actually working with my house currently. And you can see some of the electrical components from my solar system right here, and also my utility meter. And I'll just talk briefly about how that works. So, when people are thinking about solar, of course, they're thinking about the rooftop panels that are up on the roof. My panels are producing DC electricity when the sunlight hits them up there. And that DC electricity is coming from my panels down this conduit that you see right here to the components that are on the outside of my house. And so you come over here, we've got the DC power coming from my solar system upstairs, and this is my central inverter. So, when you have a solar system, you're going to have a couple different setups, and it's about inverting that DC electricity over to AC electricity that's usable in your home. And there's a couple different approaches. This is a central inverter with power optimizers at each panel that can read the production at each panel, and then there's also microinverter systems where you have an inverter at each panel. Both systems work very similarly. They basically do the same thing for all intents and purposes. But this is a central inverter. And we went with this one because it was a little bit more cost effective and it's also ground level. So if I need to reset the system or if I need to have the system maintained, I don't need to have anybody on my roof. They could just do it from the ground level here. Now, in addition to these components, we also have several disconnects. I have energy storage, and so there's an extra DC disconnect right here. And so in emergency situations, it's very easy for the fire department to come here and put these knife blade switches in the off position so that there's no power going into the house. This inverter also comes with an on and off switch and a LED screen right here so that I can read the production of the system down to the different microinverters. I'm sorry, the power optimizers at each panel. And then this is a production meter. So depending on when you actually had your solar system installed, you may have this other meter here that's only reading the production coming from that system. When I went solar about 5 years ago, we participated in the Smart Incentive Program. And so this meter reads the production of my system, which reports it to the utility company, and I'm compensated accordingly depending on the production of the system. So we've got the DC power coming in, it's inverted over to AC power here, and then this is where it goes into my main panel, providing usable electricity for my house. Now, it's important for folks to understand what's called net metering. And so we're going to turn to the utility meter right here. So this is my utility net meter. And before you have solar, if you're just like majority of homeowners that are out there without solar panels, you have a meter that the utility company uses to charge you for the electricity you're consuming. And so just like reading the odometer to a car, they look at your meter and then they wait their typical billing cycle length of time, which is typically 30, 32 days or something like that. And then the difference between those two different readings is how much they kilowatt hours you used and how they bill you for the electricity you consumed in that period of time. When you have a solar system, the meter actually works a little bit differently in that it's a bi-directional net meter that can actually spin in both directions depending on whether you're pulling or pushing electricity onto the grid. What people don't realize is that the grid is actually a two-way street. It isn't just a one-way street where you're only pulling, you can actually push electricity back out to the grid as well. So what this utility net meter does is it reads what I'm pulling from the grid, but also what I'm pushing onto the grid from my solar system. If I'm ever producing more electricity than what I'm consuming at any point in time, this is actually going to be exporting that electricity. And the meter is essentially running backwards, and I'm building up a credit in my utility account. Now, when the sun goes down, I'm no longer producing electricity and pulling electricity from the grid, then the meter spins forward like it always did before. And so the utility company then reads the net of what I'm pushing versus what I'm pulling. And my solar electricity offsets what I'm using from the grid. So, for example, if I were to produce 600 kilowatt hours with my system, but I only use 500 kilowatt hours, then I would have exported 100 kilowatt hours and vice versa. So, in those times where I'm producing more than what I need, the utility company actually issues me a net metering credit. These credits, they never expire, they never go away. They're kind of like the old rollover minutes that you can think of, where if you don't use up the credits, they just keep rolling over into the next month until you need to use them. So if the system is sized appropriately and it's sunny enough, then homeowners can get 100% of their electricity from the solar system, which again ties in really nicely if you're heating your house with heat pumps. And so that net metering is really, really the most important thing for a lot of people to understand. If you're getting 80% of your electricity from a system, then you only have to buy 20% from the utility company, and you could be completely independent of utility prices increasing, which is a big reason why we decided to make the switch ourselves. So this is my solar system. You can see up on the roof there. This is a 6.93 kW DC system, and I've got 21 total panels. They're 330 watts per panel. Now, when you're going solar these days, most of the panels that are installed today are black on black, meaning that they're completely black. My panels are about 5 or 6 years old, still have that white backsheet to them. But what people like about these new black on black panels is they're very sleek, they're very low profile, and they blend right in, especially if it's a darker roof. And again, you can see that the panels right now, um, they were covered with snow a few days ago, but they're completely clear right now. One of the common questions I get is, should I roof rake snow off of my panels? And I would say that it isn't completely necessary. The panels are black; they'll absorb some heat, and then typically the day after a snowstorm is pretty sunny. So, and they're also glass. So what we actually notice is that the snow just kind of slides off of it every now and then. We've got this big avalanche that ends up happening. But yeah, so the panels up there producing DC electricity, going down to the inverter, and then into my house.
And it looks like a lot of people are starting to transition to solar here too, right?
That's right. We got the whole neighborhood off of. So I want to take a quick second and talk to you about this line height. Okay. So we have the outdoor units that are on the our other end of the house. And again, we have to go from the outdoor unit to wherever the indoor units are located. And how we do that depends on the house. Sometimes we're running these line sets, and I can show you what it looks like from the inside through the attic. Sometimes we're doing it all externally like this, and sometimes we're actually going through unfinished basement, which is what we did in my particular case. So we have the outdoor units on the far side. We have the line set going through the ceiling of my unfinished basement. We're actually coming out adjacent to my furnace room here, and we are going up to the second floor bedroom and the floor unit that we have there. The wall unit that we saw in my living room is that one right over there. And so we've got the line set coming out, and these are pre-primed. They actually can be painted to match the color on the outside of the house. It's one of the common questions we get. Just haven't gotten around to painting it quite yet. But this is an example of a typical line set. Kind of looks like a white gutter that we use to cover up the refrigerant lines going from the outdoor unit going into the indoor units.
And then a final shot of the sun. That's great.
So I want to show you the battery backup that we have for my solar system. So this is an LG Chem battery. This is a 10 kilowatt battery, and this is not a whole home battery. We actually have this backing up certain critical loads. And so, of course, the concept here is that I have off grid power. So, in my area, for whatever reason, we lose power a few times a year. Sometimes it could be hours, sometimes it's just a few minutes. And so, this is great to have as peace of mind if we were ever to lose power. One of the more common misconceptions that you see out there is that you'll still have power during an outage if you have a solar system. That's actually not the case at all unless you have a battery backup. And that's really for safety reasons so that the solar system isn't backfeeding that electricity into the home or potentially backfeeding the electricity out to the lines and hurting the linemen that are working to get the power restored. So during an outage, I'm able to island myself off from the grid and have about 10 kilowatt hours or so of backup power here from the system, which is depending on how much I'm using and what I'm using at the time, is anywhere between 10 to 14 hours of battery backup power, which is typically long enough to at least get me to the next day or get me to where the power is back up and running from the grid itself. So, as I mentioned before, this is not a whole home battery. You can get a whole home battery that backs up the entire panel, but this is a battery that I'm able to back up for critical circuits, and I have that on a critical loads panel. So I have the power coming in, it's being stored by the battery, and this is connected to a critical loads panel, which is right next to my main service panel right here. I have a 200 amp panel with the majority of my house loads. And then for this critical loads panel, there's just a few circuits that is super critical during an outage. And so what we chose in terms of the four circuits is our fridge so that we can keep the food fresh in our house during an outage. And we also have the furnace. So in addition to my heat pumps, I also still have an oil furnace as emergency backup because it draws very low electricity. And so I'm able to back it up with a battery backup like this. So during an outage, if it's the winter time, I'm able to still keep my house warm, which is really nice to have that redundancy, multiple sources of heat in the house. I also have my master bedroom. I also have my family room in there. And if I wanted Wi Fi during an outage, I just simply have to move my router to one of those circuits. And so, fridge, furnace, and then a couple of the major rooms where we spend a lot of time is really good peace of mind for us during an outage situation. Now, a lot of people are also wondering what the utility is of a battery backup beyond that backup emergency power. And so, a battery, an energy storage system, and attached to a solar system, can also give you a great way to insulate yourself from what's called time of use rates. Now, that isn't a thing yet in Massachusetts, but time of use means that the utility company charges you more during peak demand hours, let's say from 4 to 8 p.m. And so what that means is that you could have a lower rate for the times where folks aren't really drawing a ton of electricity from the grid. And when people come home, let's say it's a summertime, at 5 p.m., you're cranking that AC, you're drawing a lot from the grid. And so in those particular cases, you could save money by drawing electricity from your battery during those peak demand hours instead of drawing it from the grid. So that's one utility of a battery backup. The most important thing is power during an outage. Now, another thing to think about are the incentives when it comes to energy storage. And so there is a program called Connected Solutions, which we actually participate in as a National Grid customer. And what that entails is allowing National Grid to draw from my battery during peak demand hours. So this would be from typically June all the way into September. So there's certain events where I allow the utility company to draw electricity from my battery backup when electricity usage is really high on the grid. And this is what's called virtual power plant. So rather than having to source that electricity from a power plant somewhere else, they're actually sourcing that from all of these energy storage systems that are onto the grid and for homeowners that participated. And so one big question is, well, what's in it for me? What do I get out of it? Well, there's actually some financial incentives when it comes to allowing the utility company to tap in. And these are 275 dollars per kW of events. And what this typically represents for the average homeowner is upwards of about $1,300 to $1,500 annually, which helps a return on investment on having an energy storage system. And so there's that benefit. And there's also benefit in the state program called the SMART incentive. So there's been different iterations of the state incentive program in Massachusetts. And there were the SREC program, Renewable Energy Credit Program, that got switched over to the SMART program. That switchover happened roughly 2018. And then the SMART program rolled out, and it was a declining incentive block structure. So, in other words, you were put in different buckets depending on when you were able to get into this program. And that's what I participated in when we went solar. And there's additional adders when you're having things like energy storage to your system. The Department of Energy Resources in Massachusetts just announced a new state program, SMART 3.0, which is bringing back the SMART program and simplifying the process for homeowners. And so, if you were to install a solar system going into 2026, you can apply for the SMART program. SMART stands for Solar Massachusetts Renewable Target. And so Massachusetts has been one of the leading states when it comes to solar power because of all these incentives that are really encouraging people to go solar. And how the new program works is that it's a direct payment from a utility company to you, depending on the power that's produced from that system. And so going into this new program, homeowners that own their solar systems and participate in SMART will be able to get 3 cents per kilowatt hour, which is a fixed locked in rate for 20 years. So it's now a 20-year program when it used to be 10 years, which really gives a lot of predictability and price certainty when people are going into systems rather than variable rates and not really knowing what it's going to be over time. People are locking in 3 cents per kilowatt hour, and this is for all the electricity coming from that system. Now, a typical household is going to be getting roughly $300 to $400 back per year, which over 20 years can translate to thousands of dollars worth of savings, which again impacts that return of investment. And these days, with the Smart 3.0 program, if you install an energy storage system in with it, you actually have an adder of 4 cents per kilowatt hour. So if you have a solar system and now a battery backup attached to it, you can actually be compensated 7 cents per kilowatt hour participating in the Smart incentive program. And again, that's over the course of 20 years that you're in the house and able to benefit from it. So I mean, that could represent anywhere between $4,000 to $8,000, depending on the size of the system and other adders, like if you have battery backup or not. So that really helps out. And that's in addition to the utility savings and offsetting your consumption from the utility company. So when you really look at these three different systems tied in together, you have heat pumps that are now saving you on your fossil fuel costs and are able to, control how much it costs to heat a house now. You also have high efficiency cooling in the summertime. You have a solar system that's going to be lowering your rate per kilowatt hour for the electricity that you're consuming from the grid. And then for emergency situations, you also have backup power. And like I mentioned, there's additional incentives when you're adding these systems. And so you can kind of see that when you're adding the three systems together, if you're able to do so and your house qualifies, you're really stacking the rebates and incentives that you're getting, both on the state side. There's still some federal incentives that you could take advantage of as well. And then also from Mass Save and the heat pump program and the rebates. We also actually had Mass Save come into my house a couple different times, and we had insulation work done as well for us where we can have a much tighter house. And depending on your area and your financial situations, a lot of the insulation air sealing work is actually 100% covered as well. So you can really see at this point how all these systems sort of tie in together and why you might want to think about switching over from your current situation. Yeah.